The October fog lay thick and low over London that evening when an extraordinary object arrived at Baker Street. A mask of beaten copper, human in shape yet utterly inhuman in expression, its smooth surface reflecting the gaslight in a dull, unsettling gleam. It came wrapped in layers of brown paper and string, with neither sender's name nor accompanying letter, only a small card tucked beneath the final fold that bore two terse words in an unsteady hand. "Help me." Holmes stood over the thing for some moments in complete silence, his lean figure outlined against the firelight. Even in repose, there was something predatory about his stillness. I admit the mask made me uneasy. Its features were neither grotesque nor beautiful, yet there was a blankness about the eyes, mere slits rather than openings, that left the imagination to populate what lay behind. "Copper," Holmes murmured at last. "Not brass, not bronze. Industrial work, but finished by hand. No obvious mechanism, no straps." He glanced at me. "Well, Watson, shall we see what sort of trouble has chosen to introduce itself without knocking?" Before I continue with this remarkable case, please subscribe to Detective Sherlock if you haven't already. Your support allows us to keep bringing these mysteries to you. Now, let us proceed. He lifted the mask with a care I had seen him reserve for delicate chemical glassware. Turning it in his hands, he examined the interior, tracing with one long finger the faintly darkened line that ran along the edges where it would have met a wearer's skin. "Interesting," he said softly. "There are scoring marks inside, here and here, as though something once fit into grooves along the cheek and brow. But the fittings are gone. And note the very faint residue along the edges. Some compound, perhaps, that has oxidized. You see how the copper darkens there, Watson?" I did indeed. The interior margin showed a shadowy band, not quite verdigris, but something subtler, like the ghost of a stain. Holmes set the mask down on a sheet of clean paper, then turned his attention to the wrapping. He smoothed the brown paper out flat, inspecting the creases and edges. A faint scent rose, tobacco, a trace of perfume, and something metallic. "No postal marks," he observed, "delivered by hand. The string is of ordinary make, but tied in a knot favored by dock laborers rather than clerks. The card..." He held it up to the light. The words, "Help me," had been written with a steel nib that had caught slightly on the paper, leaving microscopic burrs. The hand was educated but unsteady, the letters slanting forward as if hastily written. "Whoever sent this was frightened," Holmes said. "Frightened enough to strip this object of its context, its history, and forward only the heart of the matter. That, at least, is honest. We must now wait for the rest of the story to arrive, which it will." He had barely finished speaking when Mrs. Hudson appeared at the door with a telegram on a tray. Holmes tore it open. "Mask must be kept safe. Will call in person at once. Do not show to anyone. Danger attends its possession. Barrington." "Barrington," Holmes repeated thoughtfully. "The name rings faint bells. Watson, I believe we are about to receive a visit from a man who has allowed superstition to outpace his judgment." Our visitor arrived less than half an hour later. Mr. Edward Barrington was a tall, angular man of perhaps 40, dressed in morning black, his face pale and strained as if from recent shock. His eyes went at once to the copper mask, and he flinched visibly. "You opened it," he said hoarsely. "You touched it." Holmes indicated a chair. "The world is safer when dangerous objects are examined rather than left in their wrappings, Mr. Barrington," Sit down and tell us why this particular piece of metal has unstrung you." Barrington sat, but he never quite removed his gaze from the mask. "It belonged to my uncle," he said. "Reginald Barrington. He died 3 nights ago. The coroner calls it heart failure brought on by fright. I do not easily credit such phrases. The dead cannot testify to their own terror." "Your uncle's profession?" Holmes asked. "A collector. Antiquities, curiosities, anything rare or unusual. His house in Kensington is more museum than home. The mask was one of his latest acquisitions. He purchased it 6 months ago from a Belgian dealer. It is said to be 4 centuries old from Italy. A punishment device, perhaps, or a relic of some secret society. No one is sure." "And what is sure?" Holmes asked. "That every man who owned it before my uncle came to a bad end," Barrington said bleakly. "At least, according to the stories that came with it. The Italian noble who first possessed it was murdered in his bed. The French officer who took it during the Napoleonic campaigns shot himself. The Prussian collector who acquired it afterward drowned in his own fountain. The Belgian dealer's warehouse burned to the ground. My uncle dismissed all this as coincidence spiced into a legend to enhance its value. He laughed at curses. He did not laugh when he died." Holmes's fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Tell me about his death, in detail." Barrington swallowed. "He lived alone with 3 servants and myself. I stayed with him after his health declined last year. 3 nights ago we dined as usual. He retired early to his study, where he often sat late with his collection. At midnight, the housekeeper, Mrs. Fletcher, heard a terrible cry. We rushed to the study and found the door locked from the inside. There was no answer. We forced it." He paused, staring at some memory only he could see. "My uncle was in his armchair, rigid, eyes bulging as if he had seen some horror beyond bearing. No wound, no sign of struggle, and on his face, the mask," Holmes supplied. "Yes, fitted perfectly over his features, smooth, expressionless. He was stone dead beneath it." His hands were limp at his sides. He had not tried to claw it off. There were faint marks on his skin where the metal had pressed in. The doctor said his heart had stopped, likely from sudden fright. I say something killed him. "Something or someone," Holmes said. "Who placed the mask on his face?" "That is why I am here. The room was locked, the windows bolted. The servants were all in their wing. I was in my own bedchamber. No one could have entered or left without being seen. My uncle had sworn never to wear the mask, said it was a foolish object that belonged in a cabinet, not on a man's head. Yet there it was." "Where did he usually keep it?" Holmes asked. "In a glass case in his study," Barrington replied. "On a plinth, under a dome. The case was open when we found him, the dome on the floor, unbroken." "So," Holmes said softly, "the mask left its case, found its way onto your uncle's face, terrified him to death, and left no trace of human intervention that the cursory examination of a club doctor could detect. You sent it to me, then warned me away from it. What do you believe it to be, Mr. Barrington?" Barrington's composure frayed. "A weapon," he whispered. "An instrument of murder. Perhaps laced with poison or constructed to suffocate. Perhaps worse, I do not know. But I know my uncle was not a man easily cowed. Something in that thing killed him, and I fear whoever made it or sold it may now come looking for it again." Holmes rose, his decision made. "You were right to send it away from that house. Objects can be watched, tracked. A man who believes in a curse may be less quick to break into Baker Street than into a private collection. You will return home tonight and carry on as usual. Say nothing of your visit to us. Watson and I will call at your uncle's house tomorrow. Until then, the mask remains under my eye, It will not move unless I move it." When Barrington had gone, leaving the mask once more gleaming dully on our table, I could not restrain my unease. "Do you truly intend to keep that thing here?" I asked. "What if there is poison on its inner edge, as he suggested?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Then we shall not wear it. Calm yourself, Watson. Copper is a poor carrier of subtle agents compared to glass or fabric. But let us not rely on supposition when experiment will serve." The hours that followed were among the strangest I recall in Baker Street. Holmes subjected the mask to every test his chemical knowledge could contrive. He held it under his magnifying lens, tapping it with a steel rod to listen for concealed cavities. He sprinkled its interior with reagents, watching for color changes. He applied litmus, iodine, and a variety of fumes. None produced more than slight discoloration where the old oxide had already presented. "It has been fitted with something at some time," he concluded, indicating the faint scores along the cheeks and brow. "Perhaps pads, perhaps springs. But whatever they were, they have been removed. Our killer, if killer there is too clever to leave a smoking gun in plain sight. No, Watson. If the mask killed Reginald Barrington, it did so in a fashion more subtle than simple chemistry." The following day we called at the late collector's house in Kensington. The building matched Barrington's description, a respectable townhouse hiding behind it a warren of rooms filled to overflowing with objects from every continent. Terracotta heads from Africa jostled with Greek vases and Chinese scrolls. A mummy case leaned in one corner. The air smelled of dust, leather, and a faint hint of camphor. Barrington received us in the front drawing room, his black attire even more somber in the daylight. "I've told the staff you are valuers," he said in a low voice. "No one suspects anything beyond the usual business of a collector's death." "Excellent," Holmes said. "Take us to the study." The study was at the back of the house, overlooking a small garden. It was a large room, wood-paneled, with tall bookcases and several display cases. A heavy armchair sat near the fireplace, angled slightly toward a glass-fronted cabinet. On a low table beside the chair, a decanter and glass remained where the dead man had left them. Holmes's eyes took in everything at once. The position of the chair, the line of sight to the cabinet where the mask had rested, the window latches, the rugs flattening where feet had habitually rested. "Show me the door, the lock, the windows," he said. Barrington obliged. The study door was thick oak, its lock sturdy and in good repair. There was no sign of fresh damage. The 3 windows overlooking the garden had inside catches. All had been locked from within when the body was found, according to Barrington and the housekeeper, whom Holmes politely but firmly cross-examined. "And the servants?" Holmes asked. "Where were they?" "Mrs. Fletcher, the housekeeper, was in her room at the top of the house," Barrington said. "James, the valet, had the night off and returned late, but has witnesses at his club. Annie, the maid, sleeps in the attic near Mrs. Fletcher. None were on this floor." "And you?" "In my room at the front. I heard the cry as she did." "Describe the cry," Holmes said. "A single shout," Barrington said slowly. "More like a man startled than in pain. Then nothing." Holmes moved to the cabinet where the mask had resided. Inside, on a velvet stand, was a bare space in the shape of its absent occupant. The glass door was now open. "Was it locked that night?" he asked. "Yes," Barrington said. "I checked it myself before my uncle retired. He kept a small key for it on his watch chain." "And his watch?" Still in his pocket when we found him, Barrington said. The key, too. Holmes went to the armchair where the collector had died. He crouched, studying the fabric closely. With a small knife, he lifted a few threads of lint clinging to the cushion, examined them, and let them flutter back. No disturbance here, he murmured. No scuff marks on the floor suggesting a struggle. No scratches on the arms where a man might have clutched at them in distress. Yet he died in evident terror, we are told. He turned suddenly to Barrington. Your uncle was a fanciful man? Not at all, Barrington said. He prized his reputation for skepticism. He once wrote an article mocking spiritualists and table-turners. That is why this has shaken me so. If someone like him could be broken by a mere object, then what protection do the rest of us have? The protection of understanding, Holmes said crisply. Superstition thrives in ignorance. Our task is to replace the former with the latter. Tell me, besides yourself, who knew your uncle had acquired the mask? Several collectors, Barrington said. He liked to boast of new acquisitions in his circle. A Mr. Percival Fletcher, who co-owns an antiquities house in the Strand, a Miss Lydia Harcourt, an art historian who catalogued some of his pieces, a few others at his club. And did anyone warn him against it? Yes, Barrington said after a moment's hesitation. Miss Harcourt. She had read the provenance notes. She begged him to send it to a museum for study, said it had a history of blood, and that nothing good would come from keeping it at home. Holmes's eyes sharpened. Did she mention where she had read this history? In some old Italian monograph, she said, Barrington replied. She brought photocopies. He gestured to a shelf. They may still be here. Holmes found them at once, a series of pages bound roughly together in Italian with English annotations in neat female handwriting. We could not read the original, but the notes sketched a lurid history. A Venetian noble who supposedly used the mask to punish enemies, a secret trial wherein it was declared cursed and ordered destroyed, a disappearance from records until it surfaced centuries later in a private collection. Holmes flipped through, then closed the packet. Legends, half remembered and embroidered, he said. Useful to a certain type of imagination. More useful still to a certain type of criminal. Mr. Barrington, I would very much like to meet both Mr. Fletcher and Miss Harcourt. Over the following days, Holmes spun a web around the circle that surrounded Reginald Barrington and his mask. Mr. Percival Fletcher, the antiquities dealer, was a plump, nervous man whose eyes never settled and whose shop contained a disquieting abundance of items with dubious paperwork. Miss Lydia Harcourt, by contrast, was composed, precise, and fiercely intelligent, with ink-stained fingers and an encyclopedic knowledge of European artifacts. Fletcher professed nothing but admiration for Barrington's collection and sighed theatrically about the tragedy of his death. Under Holmes's needling, however, he admitted that the late collector had recently refused to sell him several pieces, including the mask, for resale to a very interested continental buyer who specialized in objects with colorful reputations. The very man who would pay more for a curse, Holmes murmured after we left Fletcher's shop. And thus, likely, the man most inconvenienced by Reginald's inconvenient survival. There is motive for murder, Watson, if we can but link him to the means. Miss Harcourt, when we visited her small Bloomsbury flat, was forthright. I warned Mr. Barrington because I feared precisely this, she said. Not some supernatural vengeance, but the dangers that cling to objects which have been used in cruelty. Men who treasure such things are often blind to who else covets them for baser reasons. I believed the mask had once been used as a torture device. There is evidence in the Italian trial records of its being placed on a prisoner's face and gradually tightened with screws. Enough pressure in the right places can induce panic, even stop a heart. Your own medical training will confirm that, Dr.
Watson. I had to concede that it could. But the fittings are gone now, she went on.
The screws, the bands, someone removed them, perhaps the Belgian dealer to render it safe. The stories remained, but the mechanism was lost, or so I believed.
Until a man died beneath it, Holmes said.
She flinched. Yes. When I heard, I thought, foolishly, I suppose, that the legends had proven true, that some essence of cruelty remained in the thing. I'm not usually so fanciful, but the timing.
Holmes regarded her keenly. You visited Barrington House after acquiring the Italian records. Did you ever have the mask in your hands?
Once, she admitted. He allowed me to study it under supervision. I sketched the interior. The old fittings had indeed been removed. There were faint grooves where they had once been, but nothing more. I told him it was now only metal. He laughed and said that was all it had ever been. Holmes asked a few more precise questions, then took his leave. On our way back to Baker Street, I pressed him. You suspect Fletcher, not Miss Harcourt, I said. Why? Because Fletcher knows the market, Holmes said. He also has access to craftsmen who could reconstruct the mask's murderous properties from the historical descriptions. Harcourt, on the other hand, would sooner see such a device locked in a museum than returned to use. But suspicion is not proof. We require something more. That something more came from an unexpected quarter. Barrington himself, who arrived at Baker Street late one night with agitation writ plain in every gesture. Mr. Holmes, they've broken into the house, he blurted before he even sat down. Someone tried to force the cellar door. James heard them and chased them off, but they were after something specific. I know they were. The police took a report and left. They never even asked about the missing mask. Then they are idiots, Holmes said pleasantly. Show me. We returned immediately to Barrington House.
The servants were pale and jittery. Mrs. Fletcher clutched a rosary, muttering about evil that wouldn't rest. The door to the wine cellar bore fresh gouge marks around the lock, where someone had indeed tried to prise it open. Why the cellar? I asked. Surely if they wanted the mask, they would come for the study, the cabinet. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Unless they believed the mask was no longer there. Where did you send it from, Mr. Barrington? Barrington blinked. From the cellar. I did not want the servants to see I was removing it. I packed it there and gave the parcel directly to the messenger at the tradesman's entrance. Then whoever tried that door tonight, Holmes said softly, knows more of your movements than they should. They expected to find something you had hidden below. When it was gone, they tried to recover what remained. What remained? I asked. Holmes knelt by the cellar door, examining the scratched wood. Then he looked at the floor, where faint traces of mud and a few grains of some dark residue clung near the threshold. Watson, you once showed me an article on modern asphyxiants, he said, apropos of nothing. Gases used in mines, heavier than air, deadly in small, enclosed spaces. I stared at him. You think? I think, he said, rising, that the mask did not kill by pressure or by simple fright. I think it was converted into a delivery system, a portable chamber placed over the victim's face into which some subtle gas was released. It would leave no external mark, move quickly, and be easy to ascribe to heart failure in an older man. To reconstruct such a device, one would need knowledge of both metallurgy and chemistry. Fletcher alone does not fit that profile. He snapped his fingers. But Fletcher has a partner. You recall his mention of a consulting expert, Mr. Jasper Quill, who works in the back room and never meets clients. A former university man,
fallen on hard times?
I've been remiss not to visit him sooner. The following day, we paid a second call on the Strand Antiquities shop. Fletcher greeted us with oily affability, but when Holmes insisted firmly on seeing Mr. Quill, the dealer's composure slipped. "He's not well," Fletcher protested. "A man of delicate nerves, not fit for visitors." "On the contrary," Holmes said, "I think his nerves are the healthiest part of him. It is his conscience that may be unwell." Pushing past Fletcher with a speed that startled even me, Holmes strode through a curtained arch into the back room. There, amid shelves of unlabeled bottles and metal fixtures, a man in a stained apron looked up from a workbench, startled. He was in his 40s, his hair thinning, his eyes red-rimmed from chemical fumes or lack of sleep. "Mr. Quill, I presume," Holmes said, "late of the university chemistry department, resigned after an unfortunate experiment with chloroform in a crowded lecture hall, if my sources are correct." Quill's face drained of color. "Who are you?" "Someone tired of seeing clever men squander their talents," Holmes replied. "You helped Fletcher retrofit the copper mask. You reconstructed the interior fittings from Harcourt's translated descriptions, then designed a means of releasing gas once it was in place. A small ampule lodged inside, perhaps, broken when the mask was tipped or when a concealed pin was pressed. The wearer would inhale a concentrated dose. Death would be swift, apparently natural. Neat, untraceable, if you assume no one will ever examine the device as carefully as I have." Quill's eyes flicked to a shelf, then to the door. Holmes stepped sideways, blocking his path without seeming to move. "I didn't want anyone to die," Quill said suddenly. "It was theoretical, an academic exercise. Fletcher said the mask would never be used, just displayed as authentic with its mechanism restored. He paid well." I needed the funds." "And when a man died?" Holmes asked softly. Quill swallowed. "I read about it in the paper. I went to Fletcher, furious. He said it was too late, that the collector had brought it upon himself by meddling. I threatened to go to the police. He laughed and said they would hang us both. Then he said we should get the mask back and destroy it. I agreed. But you have it now. He does not know that. He thinks Barrington hid it in the cellar." Holmes's expression was unreadable. "So Fletcher sent men to break in, to seize the mask, to remove the evidence of your shared guilt. Honor among thieves is a delicate thing." The case concluded, as so many did, in a flurry of statements, arrests, and carefully arranged confrontations. Fletcher tried to cast all blame on Quill, painting himself as a mere merchant, ignorant of the device's true lethality. Quill, cornered by his own professional pride and guilt, gave a detailed account of how he had reverse-engineered the mask's original torture mechanism and converted it into a gas delivery system using a compound he believed would degrade quickly, leaving no trace. "You were wrong on that point," Holmes told him calmly. "There were microscopic residues along the interior edge. Not enough for the club doctor to notice, but sufficient to betray the method to a more attentive eye. Your curse, Mr. Quill, turned out to be no more than your own knowledge turned backward on itself." Barrington, confronted with the full story, expressed a complex mixture of relief and lingering superstition. "You've proved the curse false, Mr. Holmes," he said. "And yet, so many deaths along its path, so much coincidence. Can we be sure there was no something else?" Holmes regarded him levelly. "We can be sure, Mr. Barrington, that men killed other men and used the legend of a curse as camouflage.
Where people compromise their safety for profit, where criminals exploit fear, objects like that mask become stage props.
The danger does not lie in the copper. It lies in those who wield it, and in those who refuse to look past the story for the hand beneath. The mask itself was ultimately destroyed, at Holmes's insistence. He supervised its reduction in a secure furnace under controlled conditions, ensuring no further harm could be wrought with its metal or its legend. "Some things," he said afterward, watching the last traces of its orange glow fade, "are not worth preserving, even as curiosities. Let the copper mask live only in your notes, Watson. That is an immortality it deserves more than any glass case." As I wrote the case up later, I reflected that it represented a pattern we had seen many times. Superstition used as a smokescreen for calculated crime. Legends invoked to excuse or obscure the choices of living men. The case of the copper mask was not, in the end, about a cursed object. It was about three clever people, Fletcher, Quill, and even Barrington's uncle, who each, in their own way, believed they could profit from playing with danger without paying its cost. Holmes's work, as ever, was to strip away the romance and reveal the machinery beneath. The screws hidden inside the copper, the ampule sealed in the cavity, the marks on the cellar door, the lies in Fletcher's voice, the guilt in Quill's trembling hands. In doing so, he freed Barrington from a fear that might easily have haunted him to the end of his days. "The mind that believes itself cursed," Holmes observed to me one evening, "is often as much a prisoner as any man in chains. Show it that its jailer is only another man with keys, and you have done more than solve a crime. You have redrawn the borders of that person's world." The copper mask, in the end, had no power beyond that given to it by human credulity and human malice. In exposing that fact, Holmes once again demonstrated that the most formidable weapon against darkness, whether of ignorance, fear, or deliberate cruelty, is not courage alone, but understanding.